I never expected my grandfather's inheritance to come with such a heavy burden. The day I discovered that the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association had built 9 houses on a corner of my family's land, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. That discovery set off a chain of events that would consume the next 2 years of my life, pitting me against one of the most vindictive HOAs in Fairfield County, Connecticut. My name is Xavier Owens, and until 2 years ago, I was just an ordinary software developer living in a modest apartment in Stamford. When my grandfather, Harold Owens, passed away, he left me a sprawling 40-acre property on the outskirts of New Canaan. It had been in our family for generations, mostly untouched woodland with a small cabin where my grandfather had lived as a recluse for the last decade of his life. The morning after the funeral, I drove out to the property, the deed freshly signed over to my name sitting in the glove compartment of my car. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it from childhood visits: weathered cedar siding, a stone chimney, and a front porch that had hosted countless summer evenings. But as I walked the perimeter of the property, something felt off. Following the old boundary markings my grandfather had shown me years ago, I ventured into the northeast corner, an area I hadn't visited in years. Breaking through a thick copse of maple trees, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, arranged in a neat cul-de-sac, were 9 newly constructed houses, each nearly identical to the next: beige siding, black shutters, and manicured lawns that definitely hadn't been there the last time I visited. What the hell? I muttered, approaching the nearest house where a woman was watering flower beds. "Excuse me," I called out, "when was this neighborhood built?" The woman, who introduced herself as Nancy Hoffman, smiled brightly. "About 18 months ago. Are you looking to buy?" "There's one at the end still available." "No, I'm just curious." I couldn't bring myself to tell her I thought she was living on my property. I needed to verify the facts first. Back at the cabin, I spread out my grandfather's property maps and the deed I'd just inherited. The boundary lines were unmistakable. That corner, approximately 3 acres, was definitely part of the Owens property. Someone had built an entire mini-subdivision on my land without permission. First thing Monday morning, I contacted a surveyor and my grandfather's attorney, Martin Goldstein. The surveyor confirmed what I already suspected: the houses were squarely on my property. Martin was equally stunned. "This is unprecedented, Xavier," he said, adjusting his glasses as he studied the survey results. "Someone made a catastrophic error, or what? Or they deliberately took advantage of your grandfather's declining health and isolation." Within a week, I'd learned that the Oak Ridge Estates HOA, led by its president Patricia Wilson, had somehow obtained building permits for my land. The records showed they'd purchased the parcel from a company called New England Land Holdings, which had no legal right to sell it. Patricia, a bottle-blonde woman in her 50s with a perpetual expression like she just smelled something unpleasant, had championed the expansion as her crowning achievement. When I confronted her at the HOA office, a converted garage attached to her own oversized colonial, she dismissed me with a wave of her French manicured nails. "Young man, I don't know what you think you're implying, but our expansion was completely above board. We have all the necessary paperwork." Her voice had the practiced patience of someone used to dealing with what she considered lesser minds. "The paperwork is fraudulent," I countered, sliding the survey results across her desk. "That land has been in my family for over 100 years. It was never sold to New England Land Holdings." For just a moment, Patricia's mask slipped, and I glimpsed genuine alarm before she composed herself. "Our lawyers will be in touch," she said curtly, ending our meeting. That evening, I received a call from a man named Gregory Thompson, who introduced himself as the HOA's attorney. "Mr. Owens, I understand there's some confusion about the property boundaries," he began smoothly. "There's no confusion on my end," I replied. "Your client built houses on my land without permission." "These are serious allegations," Thompson said, his voice hardening. The HOA purchased that land legally, and 9 families now call those houses home. I suggest you think very carefully about your next steps." I did think carefully, consulting with Martin and 2 other property attorneys. All agreed I had a rock-solid case. The deed had never left my grandfather's possession, and there was no record of any legal sale. But they also warned me that evicting 9 families would be a public relations nightmare and potentially devastating to innocent homeowners who had purchased in good faith. That night, unable to sleep, I walked the property under a full moon. The houses looked peaceful, warm light glowing from windows, children's bicycles left on lawns. These people had done nothing wrong. They'd bought homes, joined a community, planted gardens. How could I justify tearing that away from them? By morning, I'd made a decision that would change everything. Instead of immediately filing for eviction, I decided to approach the homeowners directly. Over the next week, I invited each family to meet with me at my grandfather's cabin. 8 of the 9 accepted. I explained the situation honestly. They were living on land that legally belonged to me, purchased through fraudulent means by their HOA. I showed them the deeds, the surveys, the historical records. Most were understandably shocked and distressed. "So you're going to kick us out?" Asked Michael Chen, who lived with his wife and 2 young daughters in the 3rd house on the cul-de-sac. "No," I said. "I'm offering you a deal. I'll draw up proper leases. You can stay in your homes, paying me a nominal rent of $1 per month, while I pursue legal action against the HOA and whoever falsified the land sale." The relief in the room was palpable. By the end of the month, 8 families had signed my lease agreements. Only the Petersons at number 9 refused, insisting that they'd purchased their home legally and would not acknowledge my claim. When word of my arrangement reached Patricia Wilson, all hell broke loose. The HOA sent cease and desist letters to every family who'd signed my lease. They called an emergency meeting where Patricia stood at a podium, face flushed with indignation. "This man is a con artist," she declared to the gathered homeowners. "He's trying to steal what we've built together. The HOA has all the proper documentation for that land purchase." I stood up from my seat in the back row. "Then produce it," I challenged. "Show us the chain of title that proves my grandfather sold that land to New England Land Holdings." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Our attorneys are handling this matter. In the meantime, any homeowner who acknowledges this squatter's claim will be in violation of our covenant and subject to fines." The next day, each of my tenants found violation notices on their doors, citing an obscure bylaw about unauthorized rental agreements. The fines were $500 per day. This was when I realized I wasn't just fighting for my property rights. I was fighting for these families who were being bullied by an organization meant to protect their interests. I hired the best real estate attorney in Connecticut, Natalie Hernandez, a fierce litigator with a specialty in property disputes. "This is one of the most egregious cases of land theft I've seen," Natalie said after reviewing my documentation. "And the way they're intimidating these homeowners is unconscionable." We filed for an emergency injunction to prevent the HOA from collecting fines while the ownership dispute was resolved. Judge Marcus Wilkins granted it, much to Patricia's visible fury when she stormed out of the courthouse. That evening, my phone rang non-stop with calls from the homeowners. The HOA had escalated. Now they were turning off utilities, claiming infrastructure maintenance. The Millers' water had been shut off while their daughter was in the shower. The Johnsons lost electricity while their infant son was napping in a room that quickly became sweltering in the summer heat. "They can't do this," Natalie assured me when I called her in a panic. "Document everything. We'll be back in court tomorrow." By morning, things had gotten worse. HOA security guards, a service I hadn't even known existed until then, were stationed at the entrance to the cul-de-sac, preventing my tenants from leaving for work. When Robert Williams attempted to drive past them, they slashed his tires. Judge Wilkins was not amused. He expanded our injunction and ordered Patricia Wilson to appear for a contempt hearing. She arrived with Gregory Thompson and 3 other attorneys, all projecting confidence that quickly wilted under the judge's scrutiny. "Your Honor, the HOA is simply protecting its property and enforcing its bylaws," Thompson argued. "By slashing a resident's tires," Judge Wilkins raised an eyebrow. "By cutting utilities to homes with children, Miss Wilson, this court takes a very dim view of what appears to be blatant intimidation." Patricia's face flushed crimson. "We have every right, you have the right to remain silent," the judge interrupted. "I suggest you exercise it before you find yourself facing criminal charges." The expanded injunction prevented the HOA from interfering with the residents in any way while the case proceeded. But that didn't stop Patricia from finding more creative methods of harassment. Early on a Saturday morning, I received frantic calls from multiple tenants. Overnight, someone had planted dozens of "for sale by owner" signs across all 8 lawns, along with flyers listing the homes at prices far below market value. The homeowners' phone numbers were printed prominently, resulting in hundreds of calls from eager bargain hunters. When Rebecca Davidson, a single mother in the 5th house, confronted Patricia about the signs, the HOA president was caught on Rebecca's doorbell camera saying, "If you choose to rent from that con man instead of respecting your legal obligations to the HOA, you deserve what you get." The footage became Exhibit A in our growing legal battle, now expanded to include harassment claims. But the HOA's tactics were taking a toll on the families. The Millers decided they couldn't take the stress and moved out, abandoning most of their belongings in the process. I was devastated. These people were suffering because I'd tried to find a middle ground. That night, I made another decision. The next morning, I invited all the remaining families to the cabin again. "I'm sorry for what you're going through," I told them. "I tried to be fair, but it's clear the HOA won't stop until they've driven you all out." "What are we supposed to do?" asked Sarah Johnson, bouncing her fussy infant on her hip. "We can't afford to lose our investment, but we can't live like this either." "I have a proposal," I said. "I'm going to offer to buy your homes from you at full market value as if they were on legitimately purchased land. You can use that money to relocate without financial loss. Then I'll deal with the HOA myself." The room fell silent as they processed my offer. "Why would you do that?" Michael Chen finally asked. "You already own the land. Eventually, you'll win in court." "Because none of this is your fault," I replied simply. "And life's too short to spend years in litigation while Patricia makes your lives miserable." Within a month, I'd purchased 7 of the 9 houses, using most of my savings and taking out a substantial loan against the property itself. The families moved out gradually, each expressing profound gratitude. I made sure to stay in touch, helping them find new homes and even assisting with moving costs for those who needed it. Only 2 houses remained occupied: the Petersons, who still refused to acknowledge my claim, and Patricia Wilson herself, who I discovered had purchased the vacant 9th house through a shell company when she realized what I was doing. "Checkmate, Mr. Owens," she said smugly when I discovered her name on the deed. "I'm not going anywhere." But Patricia had overlooked something critical. By purchasing a home in the development, she'd unwittingly put herself under the same lease terms I'd established as the legal landowner. And unlike the other residents, I had no intention of buying her out. The court date for the main property dispute finally arrived 6 months after I discovered the houses. The evidence was overwhelmingly in my favor. New England Land Holdings turned out to be a shell company created just 3 weeks before the supposed land sale, with ties to Gregory Thompson's brother-in-law. The forged deed had my grandfather's signature dated 2 months after he'd been admitted to hospice care, barely able to hold a pen. Judge Wilkins didn't even need to deliberate. The court finds that the land in question has at all relevant times belonged to the Owens family, and that the purported sale to New England Land Holdings was fraudulent. Mr. Owens is the legal owner of the property and all structures upon it. Patricia's face contorted with rage. "This isn't over," she hissed as she pushed past me outside the courtroom. She was right about that, at least. 2 days later, I was served with papers from the county building inspector, citing code violations on all 7 vacant houses I now owned. The inspections had been requested by none other than Patricia Wilson. "The electrical systems are non-compliant," read one citation. "Immediate repair required or structure must be vacated." The irony wasn't lost on me. The very houses the HOA had built were now being declared unsafe by the same HOA. Natalie was furious. "This is blatant abuse of process. The judge will see right through it." "Maybe," I said, "but it'll take time, and meanwhile, I'm stuck with 7 houses I can't do anything with." That evening, as I sat on my grandfather's porch watching the sunset, an idea began to form. The next day, I filed paperwork to create the Owens Family Land Trust and transferred ownership of the property into it. Then I filed for permits to establish a small, sustainable community housing project. Patricia predictably objected, claiming the land was subject to Oak Ridge Estates' HOA covenants. But Judge Wilkins, growing visibly tired of her tactics, ruled that since the HOA had never legally owned the land, their covenants didn't apply. 3 months later, the first of my new tenants moved in, the Miller family, returning to their former home at a reduced rent. I'd used the time to convert the properties to solar power, install rainwater collection systems, and create a community garden between the houses. Patricia watched from her window as moving trucks arrived, her face a mask of fury. That night, she attempted to have the community garden bulldozed, claiming it violated HOA landscaping standards. The police arrived just in time to stop the bulldozer operator, who admitted Patricia had paid him in cash for the after-hours job. This time, Judge Wilkins had reached his limit. He found Patricia in contempt of court and imposed a $25,000 fine. More significantly, he ordered a forensic audit of the Oak Ridge Estates' HOA finances going back 5 years. The results were explosive. Patricia had been skimming HOA fees for years, using the money to finance her luxury SUV and vacation home in Florida. The fraudulent land deal had been an attempt to legitimize her biggest embezzlement, yet she diverted over $450,000 of HOA funds to purchase my land, money that had actually gone to an offshore account she controlled. The criminal charges came swiftly after that. Patricia was arrested at her home on charges of fraud, embezzlement, forgery, and criminal conspiracy. Gregory Thompson faced disbarment proceedings and his own set of criminal charges for his role in the scheme. As Patricia was led away in handcuffs, she looked back at me standing on my porch. "I built something beautiful here," she shouted. "You had no right to destroy it." "I'm not destroying anything," I called back. "I'm just reclaiming what was stolen." With Patricia gone and the criminal investigation expanding to include the entire HOA board, the Petersons finally accepted reality. They approached me about purchasing their home, and I agreed to the same terms I'd offered the others. They moved out 2 weeks later, leaving only Patricia's house vacant, awaiting the resolution of her criminal case. By the 1-year anniversary of my discovery of the houses, 8 of the 9 were occupied by families who now had legitimate leases with the Owens Family Land Trust. Most were the original buyers, invited back under more favorable terms. The community garden was thriving, solar panels gleamed on every roof, and a playground I'd built stood where Patricia's pretentious HOA sign had once been. The legal battles weren't completely over. The legitimate part of Oak Ridge Estates' HOA, now under new leadership, was still trying to claim jurisdiction over my mini-community. But with their former president facing up to 20 years in prison and their reputation in tatters, they had little leverage. As for me, I'd moved permanently into my grandfather's cabin, renovating it just enough for comfort while preserving its rustic character. From my front porch, I could see the little cul-de-sac through the trees, children playing in yards that Patricia Wilson had once tried to claim through fraud. There was a certain poetic justice to it all. Patricia had sought to steal my land to build an exclusive community under her control. Instead, she'd inadvertently created the framework for something more inclusive and sustainable. The homes she'd built on my property now housed families who might never have been able to afford living in New Canaan otherwise. 2 years after my grandfather's death, his attorney Martin visited me at the cabin. We sat on the porch, drinking lemonade and watching fireflies emerge as dusk fell. "Your grandfather would be proud," Martin said, nodding toward the distant houses. "He always said this land should be put to good use someday." "I wish he could have seen it," I replied, "though I doubt he'd have imagined it happening quite this way." Martin chuckled. "Harold always did appreciate a good twist of fate." He paused, his expression growing serious. "You know, Xavier, you could have made a fortune selling this land to developers after you cleared the legal hurdles." I shook my head. That's never what this was about. The truth was, the experience had transformed me. What began as a fight for what was rightfully mine had evolved into something more meaningful. I'd witnessed firsthand how powerful interests could steamroll individuals, how systems meant to protect communities could be weaponized against them. In standing up to Patricia and the HOA, I'd found a purpose I hadn't known I was seeking. The final chapter in the saga came 6 months later, when Patricia Wilson's criminal trial concluded. She was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. As part of the judgment, her house, the 9th on my property, was forfeited. The day after sentencing, I received a call from Rebecca Davidson, the single mother who'd captured Patricia's threats on her doorbell camera. "I heard about the house," she said, "the one Patricia owned." "News travels fast," I replied. "The court just released it yesterday." I was wondering. Her voice was hesitant. "My sister Olivia just got divorced and she has 2 kids. They're living in a motel right now because rental prices are so high. I thought maybe." "Tell her to come see me," I said without hesitation. "I think we can work something out." 2 weeks later, Olivia Harrison and her children moved into the last house, completing our little community. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The house Patricia had purchased to thwart me now housed a family she would have deemed undesirable for her precious Oakridge estates. By the 3rd anniversary of inheriting the property, what had started as 9 illegally built houses had evolved into what locals now called Owens Commons, a thriving micro-community with shared values and resources. We'd added a communal workshop, expanded the gardens, and installed a small playground. Monthly community dinners in the cleared area between the houses became a tradition, with everyone contributing dishes and stories. Gregory Thompson was disbarred and sentenced to 5 years for his role in the fraud. The investigation revealed that New England Land Holdings had been involved in similar schemes across 3 states, targeting properties owned by elderly or deceased individuals. Several other HOAs faced their own reckonings as the full extent of the fraud was uncovered. As for the main Oakridge estates, they eventually dropped their attempts to claim jurisdiction over our community. Their new board president, Marcus Lee, even reached out to explore how some of our sustainability initiatives might be implemented in their neighborhood. "It's not that we want to be you," Marcus explained during one visit. "But after what Patricia did, we're trying to rebuild trust. Your community has that in spades." On a warm evening in late summer, sitting on my grandfather's porch with a glass of sweet tea, I reflected on the strange journey of the past 3 years. What had begun as a shocking discovery had transformed not just this corner of land, but my entire life. I'd left my software development career to manage the trust full-time, finding more fulfillment in building community than I ever had building code. The sound of children laughing drifted through the trees as families gathered for the monthly community dinner. Tonight was special. We were celebrating the opening of the small library we'd created in a converted garage, stocked with donated books and comfortable reading nooks. My phone buzzed with a text from Natalie Hernandez, who had become a close friend through our legal battles. "Just heard Patricia's appeal was denied. It's really over." I smiled, feeling the last weight lift from my shoulders. It had been a long, often painful road. But as I watched the families gathered below talking, laughing, sharing food across picnic tables we'd built together, I knew every step had been worthwhile. The land that my ancestors had preserved for generations had found its purpose. Not as the exclusive enclave Patricia had envisioned, but as something far more valuable, a true community, built on honesty, resilience, and mutual support. As night fell, lanterns were lit around the tables, casting a warm glow over faces that had become as familiar as family. Michael Chen spotted me watching from the distance of my porch and raised his glass in a silent toast. I returned the gesture, grateful for the unexpected gift Patricia Wilson had inadvertently given me when she tried to steal my land, the opportunity to turn an act of fraud into something authentic and lasting. The next morning, I walked the full perimeter of the property, something I'd taken to doing regularly. The original 40 acres remained largely undeveloped, the woods and streams preserved just as my grandfather had kept them. Only the northeast corner, with its 9 houses and flourishing community spaces, showed the mark of human presence. Near the eastern boundary, I discovered surveyor stakes that hadn't been there the week before, marked with the logo of a development company. A quick call to the county records office confirmed my suspicion the adjacent property had been sold, and the new owner was planning a large subdivision. Some might have seen this as a threat, but I recognized it as our next challenge. Our little community had weathered its trial by fire. Now we would have the chance to demonstrate a different way of living alongside a conventional development. Perhaps some of our approaches to sustainability and community governance would influence our new neighbors. That evening, I called a meeting to share the news. There was initial concern, of course, worries about increased traffic, noise, and the potential loss of the peaceful atmosphere we'd cultivated. But as we talked through the implications, the conversation shifted from anxiety to possibility. "Maybe we could offer to help them design green spaces," suggested Robert Williams, who had become our unofficial landscaping expert. "Or invite them to join our farmers market once they move in," added Sarah Johnson. By the end of the evening, we'd formed a committee to reach out to the developers, not in opposition, but in a spirit of collaboration. This, I realized, was the true victory over Patricia Wilson's legacy, not just reclaiming what she had tried to steal, but creating something she could never have imagined. A community that faced challenges by turning outward rather than circling the wagons. 3 years ago, I had discovered 9 houses built illegally on my land. I could have immediately evicted everyone, leveled the structures, and returned the land to forest. Legally, that would have been my right. Instead, by taking a different path, allowing families to stay, then buying them out, then creating legitimate housing opportunities, I'd found a purpose that honored both my grandfather's legacy and my own values. As I walked back to the cabin under a sky brilliant with stars, I felt a deep sense of contentment. Patricia Wilson had sought to profit from my family's land through deception. Her punishment, imprisonment, financial ruin, public disgrace had been just. But the true reckoning of her actions wasn't found in her downfall, but in what had risen in place of her scheme. Where she had envisioned exclusivity, we had created inclusion. Where she had built through deception, we had rebuilt with transparency. Where she had sought control, we had fostered cooperation. The 9 houses on my property stood as testimony to a simple truth. Communities aren't defined by who you keep out, but by who you welcome in. And sometimes, the greatest act of justice isn't just reclaiming what's rightfully yours, but transforming it into something better than it was before. The following spring, I received a letter from Patricia Wilson, sent from the federal correctional facility where she was serving her sentence. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won out. "Mr. Owens," she'd written in precise script, "I drive past your property every day in my mind. I see what I built and what you've done with it. You think you've created something better, but you've destroyed a vision of excellence and replaced it with mediocrity. Someday you'll understand that standards matter, that communities thrive on uniformity, not your hippie commune aesthetics. I may have lost the battle, but my ideas will outlive your experiment." I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer, not angry but oddly grateful for the reminder of the worldview we'd overcome. Patricia still didn't understand that her vision of excellence had been built on theft and deception, or that true excellence emerges from authenticity, not control. That evening, watching the sunset from my porch as children played on the community swing set and adults chatted while tending the shared gardens, I felt no need to respond to her letter. The thriving community below was response enough. My grandfather once told me that land has a memory. It remembers how you treat it and responds in kind. I like to think that this corner of Connecticut will remember not just Patricia Wilson's attempted theft, but also how we reclaimed it and transformed it into something that honored both the land itself and the people who now called it home. 9 houses, built without permission on my family's property. 9 opportunities to choose vengeance or healing. In the end, I hadn't just evicted everyone with my deed, I'd created the conditions for them to return on honest terms, laying the foundation for something Patricia Wilson could never have built with all her rules and regulations. A community defined not by who it excluded, but by who it embraced. And in that transformation, I found not just justice, but purpose.